Hello, and welcome to another video lecture for Mr. Mosier's 8th grade U.S. History class. This video is going to be looking at some of the major battles that take place in the war in the Pacific that take place in Asia. The textbook readings for this particular section comes to us from pages 820 to 824, War in the Pacific, and 825 to 829. Some of the guiding questions today are, what was the significance of the Battle of Midway? What was the strategy of island hopping? Who were the Navajo Code Talkers? What was their contribution to the war effort? What was the significance of the Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa? Why were the casualties so high? And then what were kamikaze attacks? In 1941, the United States was caught completely off guard by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. A lot of our battleships and destroyers were severely damaged, although not all of them were completely destroyed. Some were able to kind of get back into service relatively quickly. But between 1941 December into the beginning of 1942, things are not going very well in the Pacific. Actually, the Japanese are being very successful in most of their attacks, and it seems that they have the advantage, and they are pressing on. A key pivotal battle, sometimes seen as almost a turning point in the war in the Pacific, takes place near a series of near an island near Hawaii, a little bit north and west of Hawaii, at a place called Midway. And so the Battle of Midway takes place on June of 1942. There the Japanese and the American forces attack each other off the island of Midway. This will be a battle primarily fought by aircraft taken off from aircraft carriers, which will be a relatively new technology during World War II in terms of naval power. Historically, naval power was by your battleships. Ships would line up, fire their artillery back and forth, trying to sink the other side. And that's been the way Navy battles have taken place since forever. But starting with the advent of aircraft and being able to take airplanes off of a deck of a large ship like an aircraft carrier and then being able to land them again, extended the range of the navies. And so ships didn't have to be right by each other to attack each other. They could take their planes and attack at larger distances. And that's how most of the Battle of Midway was fought, through these aircraft carriers. This is seen as a major turning point, mainly because this was a big Allied victory for the United States. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers will be destroyed. The United States will only lose 1 aircraft carrier. As we will learn through our discussion of the war production in the United States, we were able to very quickly replace a lot of our destroyed and damaged ships through our power of manufacturing. We were very strong in the manufacturing sector. A lot of people were involved in this mass production. Now think of Rosie the Riveter, right? Rosie the Riveter. And so we were able to replace our Navy very quickly. The Japanese, on the other hand, not so much. So taking that big of a hit on their Navy really weakened their naval forces, which kind of became a kind of a turning point in terms of American victories. And so the United States was able to start to press the advantage now and move towards the Japanese mainland and try to take the capital, Tokyo. So Midway is kind of seen as this very significant, turning point, and historically in terms of naval power at the hands of airplanes on aircraft carriers. The significance of aircraft carriers were very important there at the Battle of Midway. Which brings us into island hopping, which is the strategy developed by the United States. Admiral Nimitz, who was in charge of our Pacific Fleet during the World War II. And the idea was that in order to get to Japan, we can't just take a direct shot there. There's too much open ocean there, too much possibility for the Japanese to destroy our fleet. So we need to have bases getting closer and closer to Japan so that we can use those bases for our land-based bombers to take off and bomb Japan and soften Japan up before an eventual invasion. And so the strategy called for taking island after island. And so you can see here at the Battle of Midway, but there also were battles of Tarawa, the battles of Marshall Islands, Guadalcanal, Coral Sea, Guam, Saipan, the Philippines, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. We're just kind of leapfrogging. Think about the game leapfrog. We're just going to leap to one island, take that island from the Japanese control, and then use it as a base of operations to go to the next island. So we're not going to go directly to Japan. We're going to take islands in the process as a goal to use it as a staging ground to launch eventual attacks. Now these islands are strongly defended by the Japanese, and they are not easily conquered, as we will see with 2 of the most famous battles as we get to the end of World War II. One of the participants during World War II that's rather significant was a group of Native Americans called the Navajo Code Talkers. There are about 400 Navajo Native Americans out of the American Southwest who will be enlisted in the Marine Corps who will fight in the Pacific. Their significance was they were used as secret code talkers. They transmitted messages. They would go with the soldiers with a radio, and they would contact back for things like artillery support, reinforcements, giving directions of where the Japanese were located at, and they will send those messages spoken in Navajo, which is kind of an obscure language from the Japanese perspective because they didn't know the Navajo language. And so they tried to break this odd code. They were always trying to figure out, what was this language that was being used? What was the secret code the Americans were using to transmit their information? For example, the Navajo might use the word turtle, the Navajo word for turtle, to describe a Japanese tank. And so this was the only wartime code never broken, which is pretty significant. And their story was kind of secret and hidden for really a very long time until many years after the war, when it was finally declassified, the efforts that these Native Americans had to help win the war in the Pacific against the Japanese. And of course, a very famous movie came out several years ago starring Nicolas Cage called Wind Talkers that kind of looks at the story of the Navajo Code Talkers. So they played a very pivotal and important role in World War II. The Battle of Iwo Jima and Okinawa were some of the last major battles that took place on the way to Japan. Iwo Jima and Okinawa are islands that are getting a little bit closer to the Japanese mainland. The Battle of Iwo Jima takes place on February 1945, and the Battle for Okinawa takes place on April 1945. Allied forces, led by the Americans and Marines, take these islands to establish bombing bases. So our land-based air bombers, planes, can take off and use those airfields so that they can fly to Japan, drop their payload, drop their bombs, and fly back. And so these were very important bases that the United States needed if they were going to eventually invade the Japanese mainland. The results of both of these battles, at both Iwo Jima and Okinawa, was high cost. The Japanese were showing no willingness to surrender. About 18,000 U.S. men died at both of these particular island battles. 120,000 Japanese were killed as well, fighting to the very last man. They would just not surrender. They would rather strap explosives to themselves and blow themselves up near an American tank or an American patrol unit as like suicide bombers, as opposed to surrendering. Very few Japanese were found captured alive at the Battle of Iwo Jima. The Battle of Iwo Jima also is one of the most iconic images of World War II, which is the planting of the flag of the Marines on top of Mount Suribachi, which is the main volcanic island on Iwo Jima, which you see in this photograph here. And you see the very famous planting of the flag there on top of Mount Suribachi. It's become a symbol as a sense of American grit and perseverance. Even though the battle and fighting was very intense, lots of casualties, the United States still ended up prevailing and taking the island. And so it's now a very famous image. It was used a lot as American propaganda during World War II to help people buy war bonds, and many of the men who helped plant the flag were also used back in the stateside to help sell war bonds as well. So it becomes a very iconic image during World War II. The Japanese, even though they are beginning to lose the war and the United States and our allied forces are getting closer and closer, the Japanese are definitely showing no signs of surrender. And most famously in some of these last battles, as we get closer and closer to Okinawa and Japan, the Japanese begin using something called Kamikaze. Kamikaze means divine wind. It's based upon a story of the Chinese invasion of the Japanese mainland that was prevented by a kind of a hurricane that sunk their ships, kind of a way of celebrating that they were able to win and defeat this big, massive Chinese army. So kamikaze pilots were trained to basically commit suicide. They were boarded their planes, they loaded them with explosives, and then they would purposely drive them into American ships. Basically like guided missiles in a sense. About 2,500 kamikaze missions were flown during World War II, killing about 4,000 Allied soldiers and sailors. So this was a massive problem because it was very difficult to hit these planes, and they were loaded with explosives, and they created all kinds of damage on board American ships. So as the war is beginning to come to an end in the Pacific against the Japanese are definitely showing signs that they were not really on the idea of surrender really was not in their vocabulary. They were definitely looking at they're going to keep fighting here till the very, very bitter end. So this is some of the key battles that take place in the war in the Pacific, the battles in Asia during World War II against the United States and the Japanese Empire. If you have any questions, please make sure you ask, and I'll see you later.